In this video, I'll be teaching you about kinesis using an X-Lotus run as a reference. Since there's a lot to cover, there'll be some times when I need to cut myself off.
Kinesis origin is simple but strong. It does a shit ton of damage up front, a little near the end, and then a shit ton at the very end. It's a pretty long origin at 8 seconds, but we do have a few summons that continue to hit while in origin. The origin makes up roughly 40% of our 35-second BA and 20% of our 3-minute rotation, and who gives a fuck about 6 minutes, let's be honest.
It also has the added perk of recovering our psychic points while it's going on, which leads us into our next point.
If you've played much MapleStory before, you probably are looking at my HP bar and thinking, what in God's name is that shit? That shit is psychic points, and it's extremely important to understand how kinesis works, so I'm going to nerd out a bit here. Psychic points are extremely simple. 1 bar is 1 psychic point, and some skills restore psychic points and some consume psychic points. All of Kinesis's 1st through 4th jobs were created with the idea to use psychic points instead of cooldowns. Kinetic Crash, an attacking skill, charges 1 psychic point on use. Psychic Force charges 1, and it does have a cooldown, but it's only 1 second. Metal Press costs 7 psychic points to do a lot of damage. Pile Driver charges 1 psychic point. Mind Tremor charges 1 psychic point. Deep Impact, Psychic Shot, Psychic Grab, Psychic Drain, Charger, Train, Psychic Jocks, and Psychic points. Now that you understand all that, you can see how kinesis is basically defined by their psychic point system. It's so important to have big PP that we even spend all the hyper points that lets us to change our bar from 3 bars max to 4 bars max. This is extremely simplified, but I'm going to explain how a standard mana class works in MapleStory. Okay, so your skills are in the top left and those are the cooldowns. First, you use all the skills with cooldowns to have a huge burst. They go on cooldown, so while you wait for them to come back up, you use your no cooldown skill for less damage. When the first skill comes off cooldown, you use it. It goes on cooldown again, so you go back to spamming your no cooldown skill. Notice how the circle and the triangle now have synced cooldowns, so when they come off cooldown, you can use them at the same time again. Then they go back on cooldown, and now all your cooldowns are synced. You keep going back to spamming your no cooldown skill, and then they all come off cooldown and you're back to square one. Some classes are literally just playing whack-a-mole with skills as they come off cooldown. Kinesis, on the other hand, works a bit more like this. We're going to have 4 skills again, but instead of cooldowns, they're going to have a psychic point, charge, or cost. So you start out using a skill that charges psychic point. Once you get enough to use the skill you want to use, you use it and you lose all those psychic points. Since there aren't cooldowns, you can use your skills in whatever order optimizes your damage the best. Then you go back to charging psychic points, and once you get enough, you use your next skill. Duration of skills and boss positioning is usually the main reasons why you'd want to switch your skill order up. There are even some pure RNG aspects, but we'll get into that later. So once again, once you get enough psychic points, you use your next skill. In this case, it's the square, which costs 15 points, and does a ton of damage because kinesis is so strong. For normal classes, how to use skills together efficiently is the complicated part. But for kinesis, there's 2 points of complication: how to gain points efficiently and how to spend those points efficiently. When you take into account the summons with various duration, toggles, boss positioning, and the RNG aspects, the playstyle of any kinesis can vary quite a bit. The problem with the model of using psychic points instead of cooldowns is that they eventually ran into issues where it was impossible to give kinesis new skills while keeping this playstyle. So when the 5th job came out, they decided to make cooldowns coexist among the non-cooldown 1st through 4th job skills, which gives us the current state of kinesis. Now that we've laid some groundwork, let's talk about how you actually play the class. The first thing we'll need to cover is how you charge psychic points. The most important skill for this is called Psychic Drain. When mobbing, it's a basic summon that lasts 30 seconds and recovers 1 psychic point per hit. In bossing, the skill changes completely. It turns into a passive that gives you a 40% chance to recover psychic points when certain skills hit the boss. These are those skills, and they can apply in 2 different ways. One is every single tick of damage, and the other is only the first hit applies. This is the RNG aspect I was talking about before. Depending on your luck, you could have vastly different amounts from psychic points despite doing the exact same thing. You can still use Drain actively in bossing, however it doesn't recover psychic points every hit, and the damage itself is pretty negligible, so you don't have to always have it summoned. There's a couple more skills that are used primarily to restore psychic points. The first one is Psychic Charger.
This is a very straightforward skill that restores half of your maximum psychic points when used and has a cooldown of 45 seconds. Psychic Charger is generally used off of cooldown, unlike our next skill, Mental Tempest. Mental Tempest is a 7-second iframe that does very little damage but restores you to maximum psychic points. The animation can be cancelled using Kinetic Jaunt, which makes it a very good iframe. It has an awkward cooldown of 2 minutes and is generally used during burst, but we'll get into that later. Finally, our Goddess skill is a pseudo psychic point generator. It is shared with the Demon class and has a chance to restore 30% of our psychic points. This skill is used more for the final damage effect, and any psychic points it grants is just a bonus. Okay, next we're going to build up our kinesis knowledge by filling in this graph. Most classes' damage rotations can be thought of as a timeline. In this case, kinesis is a 3-minute class, so it goes from 0 to 180 seconds. At the 1-minute mark and the 2-minute mark are mini bursts, and in between all of this is the off burst. We're going to get to all of this eventually, but let's start with the off burst. Every class has its off burst bread and butter. Nightwalker has quintuple stars, Hero has Raging Blow, and Nightlord has Brain Damage. Kinesis needs a go-to skill for charging points and a go-to skill for spending excess points. The first of these is Psychic Grab, which turns into Hexagrab from our second mastery. This is a basic no cooldown skill that restores 2 psychic points when hitting a boss with the possibility of restoring 3 due to Psychic Drain's passive. The only notable thing about this skill is that the first input will pick up items without attacking, which includes mobs, and the following 5 will actually attack. The first pickup input is also the first input of 2 other skills, Psychic Shot and Psychic Shockwave. The go-to skill for spending excess points is called Metal Press. It's a basic no cooldown skill that costs 6 psychic points with the 40% chance to give 1 psychic point back from Psychic Drain's passive. It makes up for 28% of our full rotation damage and 20% of our burst damage. It does a lot of damage, and that's about it. Since it's our first mastery, this is by far the best no cooldown skill to spend excess psychic points on. These 2 skills make up the base for our off burst damage cycle. Use Grab to charge psychic points, and use Metal Press to spend those points. There are some other notable skills that are a part of our off burst. The first is BPM. This is a toggle that does constant damage right in front of the character. Every time it hits an enemy, it consumes 1 psychic point with a 40% chance to restore that point due to Psychic Drain's passive. It is a very efficient use of psychic points and should always be toggled on while bossing. For mobbing, unfortunately it is nothing like Buccaneer's Lord of the Deep and is actually a very inefficient use of points and should always be turned off. Kinetic Combo is a passive skill similar to other classes' final attacks. Certain skills have a chance to spawn a combo orb, which does additional damage. You don't really need to ever think about this skill, but it's a nice source of damage as well as psychic points due to Drain's passive. The next important skill is Mindquake. The important part about this skill is that it applies a debuff that gives us FD, IED, and slows the boss. For obvious reasons, this debuff should be applied 100% of the time, and there's a couple things that make this easy for us. The skill lasts 30 seconds and has a cooldown of 30 seconds, and the debuff applied lasts until the skill ends. This means as long as it hits the boss at any time, the debuff will last until the skill ends. Finally, a currently obsolete skill called Trainwreck. This 12-second summon costs a whopping 15 psychic points and does damage over time. At the current time, this skill does not have any 6th job related to it, making it a very inefficient use of psychic points off burst. There is an edge case for it to be used in our burst, but we'll get to that later. Now we've covered the off burst, let's work our way up to the full burst by first talking about the mini burst. Our mini burst is mostly 3 skills with a 1-minute cooldown. This is also where we use our AB link. Yeah, no shit. The first skill we cast on our mini burst is the 5th job skill, After Image of the Other World. Casting After Image places a summon that gives a buff consisting of 50% of invested all stat and 5% critical damage. It also gives a small amount of healing for HP and MP? So yeah, you don't really notice the HP healing, and we don't even have MP, so that part of the skill doesn't really matter, but at least he kinda looks cute. The next skill we use on our mini burst is called Law of Gravity, or Log. Law of Gravity is a summon that attaches to an enemy and does damage for 22 seconds before exploding and doing more damage. It's a very convenient, easy skill that does a lot of damage and can restore psychic points due to Drain's passive. The only negative is that it needs a target to be used, so if a boss is untargetable, you'll have to delay using it. The final skill of our mini burst is your mom. Just kidding, your mom is way fat. Mind over matter, or mom, is one of our most recognizable skills. It's an iso doso octo dodecahedron summon that constantly does damage. It normally moves constantly and only stops when it touches a boss or when kinesis uses origin. It can be moved towards you by pressing the skill again, or pushed in a variety of ways using psychic assault. Since it only lasts 15 seconds, time spent where mom is not hitting the boss is a large damage loss, and keeping it on the boss should be a priority. Okay, that was a lot of info, so let's take a breather and see the stuff in action. Here's some off burst, and you'll see I'm mostly just using grab to charge points and press to spend those points. Notice how I keep a reserve of psychic points. Since my mini burst is coming up, I want to have 15 psychic points for log and mom, and I want to use all the rest on metal press during AB Link. Here is one of the downsides of kinesis, and that's when the boss teleports away from your mom. I immediately go over and reposition it since it's so much damage, but in the first place I shouldn't have gone over there and baited the teleport. Other than that one mistake, this is pretty flawless gameplay. Anyways, let's talk about movement for a second. Kinesis is a flash jump class, and its flash jump is very flexible. You can link two flash jumps in pretty much any way that you can imagine except for up jump and up jump. The flash jump is also momentum based, which leads to a couple weird things. Using a right flash jump and then a left flash jump cancels your momentum, as well as up jumping while facing the opposite way that you're flash jumping. You can see this behaves differently when you flash jump off of a wall, since the wall cancels your momentum first. The other two movement skills we need to talk about are Deep Impact and Kinetic Jaunt. Deep Impact is our TP skill. It costs 3 psychic points and covers an extremely large distance. The only downside is that there is a small startup animation, meaning it is not quite instantaneous. In my opinion, it's easily fast enough to be pretty OP, but there are mixed feelings amongst the kinesi? Kinetic Jaunt is one of my favorite skills. It normally costs no psychic points and has a 4-second cooldown. Jaunt is similar to Ho Young's and Ilium's fly abilities, but a little different. While using the skill, you must always either be stationary or moving up somehow. You cannot go directly horizontal, and you can't go downwards at all. It is useful to use similar to a blink to stall in the air, to cancel momentum for pinpoint character placement, and to dodge in ways that would be difficult otherwise. It has a ton of uses, and top kinesis all use the skill in different ways, and that's only half of it. Earlier, I mentioned the skill is used to animation cancel our iframe, but this isn't unique to just our iframe. This is part of the skill, and when it is used to animation cancel other skills, it goes on an 8-second cooldown and costs 2 psychic points. This skill can be used to animation cancel a ton of skills. The two most common uses for this are canceling our iframe and to spam metal press faster. An even weirder use case, canceling metal press into summoning mom, but at certain psychic point thresholds can cause a bug where mind over matter is summoned but doesn't actually do any HP damage and doesn't go on cooldown. It's 100% uptime. It's just fake damage. Here's one example of a use case for Jaunt. Here it was used to stop momentum and not hit the debris on the right side. You can see my mini burst is coming off a cooldown soon, so let's try to follow that. Log, after image, mom. Because this is a pretty tight run, I'm using all my skills basically as soon as they come off of cooldown, but if you wanted to, you could pre-pop, after image, and log. If you do it long enough before, you can time the explosion of log in your AB link, and that's a pretty big damage increase, but it's pretty sweaty, so you really only ever want to do that in Culvert and Punch King. Here, you can see how strong Kinesis Teleport is. Now that we've talked about the off burst and the mini burst, we can fill in the last gap, which is our full burst. I'm off bursting a bit here until my burst is back up, but when I burst, I want you to try to watch and see what's different about the mini burst versus the full burst.
fuck do I get pushed in Jenny?
Alright, you got all that, right? Congratulations, now you know kinesis. Okay, let's look at what stands out here. If you're really paying attention, you'll notice that the psychic points aren't going down very fast, despite us spamming a 6 psychic point skill, Metal Press. This is for 2 reasons. The first is that we have so many skills out that Drain's passive is being procced constantly, giving us a lot of psychic points back. The second reason is due to our primary 3-minute burst skill, Mental Overdrive. This is a bit of a weird skill because despite being our main burst skill, it actually doesn't do any damage. It has 3 effects. The first is that it constantly recovers psychic points at a relatively slow rate. Second is that all psychic point usage is halved. And the third is that it plays a dope song. This is where knowing the basics about kinesis psychic points is essential. We talked about how before, kinesis is mostly limited on their psychic point usage rather than cooldowns. This skill essentially removes that restriction for 26 seconds. This means you should use all the high psychic point cost skills that do a lot of damage as much as possible, which pretty much means spam Metal Press. Other than that, our full burst is pretty similar to our mini burst, but with 2 additional skills. The first of these is Psychic Tornado. Psychic Tornado is a summon that attaches above your head and lasts for 20 seconds, costs 15 psychic points, and has a 3-minute cooldown. At the end of the 20 seconds, Tornado is thrown and does way more damage than the damage over time from being summoned. In ideal situations, you want the explosion to be in Roar and AB Link. For Punch King and Culver, the easiest way to do this is to pop your Roar and AB Link when there's about 12 seconds left on Psychic Tornado's duration. It's a bit harder to do this in actual bossing scenarios, so generally what you'll do is use this skill first so that the duration can start to tick down while you use the rest of your skills. The other skill that we use in our full burst instead of our mini burst is called Otherworld Goddess's Blessing. It's our goddess skill, and the main thing that it does for us is gives us 11% final damage for 40 seconds. There are also 4 different effects that proc randomly, but we don't care about most of them except for one that restores our psychic points. Since it's RNG, you can't really count on it, and you shouldn't count on it in your burst, but it's pretty nice when you get a couple procs in a row and you have an excess amount of psychic points. Okay, now we need to talk about burst order, and especially when to use Mental Overdrive. As a reminder, Mental Overdrive is the skill that halves our psychic point usage and is essentially the start to being able to use all of our skills with no restraint whatsoever. There's 2 main strategies, and you'll see even the top kinesis do one or the other, and there's not really a right answer as to which one's better. It's kind of scenario dependent. In the first way, the idea is to use high cost psychic points but long duration skills before Overdrive is popped. This means especially Law of Gravity and Tornado should be popped before Overdrive. After popping Overdrive, you'll spam Metal Press until there's 15 seconds left on Law of Gravity and Tornado, and then you'll use Mind Over Matter, Roar, and AB Link and continue to spam Metal Press. The main principle behind this style of bursting is that while Overdrive is active, you want to constantly be spamming Metal Press as much as possible. By using Law of Gravity and Tornado prior to using Overdrive, that means you can fit in a few more Metal Presses for extra damage. The principles behind the second burst strategy is to condense your burst as much as possible and use Tornado and Log while Overdrive is going, since they do cost a significant amount of psychic points. The only thing that's really different is the placement of Mental Overdrive. In this case, it is before Tornado and Law of Gravity, whereas in the other strategy, it was after. Since you're leading with Mental Overdrive, that means your burst will only last as long as Mental Overdrive, which is 26 seconds. In the other burst strategy, since you're popping Tornado and Law of Gravity prior to Mental Overdrive, that means your burst actually lasts a bit longer, more like 30 seconds. This means in general that the first burst strategy will have a stronger 30-second BA, while the second strategy will have a stronger 25-second BA. Depending on the boss and the party composition, it could be better to use one or the other. For example, in Kalos, there's a long amount of setup time, and he is in Groggy, so you have a much longer time to burst, so the first burst strategy would be better there. In scenarios where it's more risky to be bursting, such as Saren Phase 2 in the Sunset cycle, it is better to use the 25-second burst since you know that you can get the whole thing off safely, whereas if you extend it to 30 seconds, you might die at some point in your burst.
In my opinion, the main downside to the 30-second burst strategy of popping Mental Overdrive later on is that it actually pushes back your 1 minute mini burst, and for giga min clears, that will really screw you. In this X Lotus, for example, you'll see that I burst in the last 15 to 20 seconds, and if I had used the first burst strategy for every single burst, I would not be able to get that last burst off because my 1 minute would have been pushed back so far.
In general, unless you're really trying to min-max your play, I wouldn't worry about this too much and just pick one that you like better and then just use that for every single burst. Now I know you're thinking that a 5-second burst difference really isn't that big of a deal, and maybe this is just overly sweaty, but the issue becomes much more apparent when you look at our origin burst. We have a very long origin animation, and for every second that you're in origin, that's 1 second that you cannot be using metal press in overdrive. So if you use overdrive at the beginning of your burst, that's minus 8 seconds of overdrive that could be used to spam metal press, which is like a quarter of the skill. Not only this, but we restore a lot of psychic points while in our origin due to Mind Over Matter, Tornado, and Law of Gravity being summoned, so you don't really need overdrive's effect while you're in your origin. Let's look at the burst if we used overdrive at the beginning of our origin burst. Generally, in your origin burst, you want to bind the boss as fast as possible with your origin, so we're not going to be waiting for Tornado and Law of Gravity to tick down to 15 seconds before using Mind Over Matter, Roar, and a B-Link. You'll see that pretty much for the entire duration of the origin, our psychic points were at the complete maximum, and overdrive was just being wasted. By the time we get out of our origin animation, Mental Overdrive is already down to 15 seconds left. In this way, our two main burst skills in our origin burst, which are Mental Overdrive and our origin, kind of cannibalize each other and don't allow the other one to be used to its maximum potential. Like mentioned before, you can fix this by using Tornado, Law of Gravity, and Mind Over Matter while not in overdrive, but it can push the timings of certain skills back and make it a little bit awkward. If you wait to use overdrive after using all those skills and your origin, that's a roughly 10 seconds that you're pushing back that cooldown, and you need that cooldown for your next burst, so pretty much every single burst will be delayed by an additional 10 seconds. There's not really a right answer for what to do, which kinda sucks and is why you'll see lots of kinesis doing different things. You'll also see kinesis use our iframe Mental Tempest at various points in their rotation depending on the boss they're doing and their playstyle. For example, in this boss, I use it exclusively during my burst just to ensure that I get a fully safe burst where I never have to jump out of Roar or anything similar, since there's so much going on. Many top kinesis will also use it in a mini burst along with a weapon jump ring, since it refills your psychic points and allows you to get off a few more metal presses. We used to have to use it during our burst exclusively for the fact that it refills our psychic points, but due to Drain's new passive, which came in about maybe a year ago at this point, you pretty much never run out of psychic points while Mental Overdrive is going. If you do run out, that's a good indicator that you're doing something wrong. It's probably worth mentioning that Kinesis's playstyle will change slightly when the 3rd and 4th masteries come, mostly due to our skill Ultimate Trainwreck getting a mastery. This is a summon, and the closer to 100% uptime you have on it, the more damage you're going to do. Other than that, Kinesis's playstyle doesn't change that much, and we get a pretty massive boost in damage. I think it was like 27% FT expected. At this point, I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say about generic bossing guidelines on kinesis, so I'm just going to info dump a bunch of random information, and if you have any other questions, I'll put a link to the kinesis doc guide below, and join the kinesis Discord if you have anything else. Kinesis has two different Oz ring setups. One is just to simply use a continuous ring, and one is to triple ring swap between a Roar 4, Weapon Jump 4, and either a Totaling 4 or a Risk Taker 4, depending on the boss and the feasibility of using a Risk Taker. Kinesis also has two different inner ability setups. The first one is to use attack speed +1, and the other one is to use a passives +1. Passives +1 gives you a lot of final damage due to various 4th job skills, getting the extra skill level, and attack speed 1 allows us to reach attack speed 10. Passives +1 is almost always going to be slightly stronger, especially in a party setting where you can get attack speed from a support, but attack speed 1 feels a lot better to play. Kinesis has a class bind in its hyper skills, and it's very shit. There's a stigma about kinesis that we don't do well in bosses that move, but that's mostly not a thing anymore due to not having to upkeep train, and mind over matter being condensed to 15 seconds instead of 30 seconds. Also, for most bosses, we get 20 seconds of bind time now. Most classes get attack speed through a booster skill that was recently turned into a passive skill, but for Kinesis it's still active and occupies one of my pet auto buff slots. The second job skill, Kinetic Pile Driver, is a super stance skill that you can spam, and it restores psychic points. Our main mobbing skill is our 5th job skill, called Psychic Shockwave, and it is not really used in bossing, except if you have an excess amount of psychic points and the boss is especially far away. Lots of top Kinesis will weave this skill in various ways, so try to look for it. However, it does such little damage that you don't even start to boost it in your 6th job until everything else is already completely finished. The number one Kinesis in Reboot once said that what I did was exactly what he would do. That's it, that's the whole fact. When bossing, you never want to be completely empty of psychic points, but you also never want to be completely full. Because if you have an excess amount of psychic points, you should be using Metal Press, and if you're completely empty, you won't be able to use skills such as Deep Impact, BPM, and in the future, Trainwreck. There has never been a Kinesis main that isn't at least a 7 out of 10. According to MapleStory.gg, Kinesis is the second least played class, only ahead of Blaze Wizard. It does not look like I'm clearing this boss, and that's with the Wild Hunter practice potion for the entire duration of the fight. Since we aren't a mana class, Mana Overload and Ethereal Form take our HP instead of MP, which really sucks in things like V-Hilla and Will Phase 2. 99% of people that make Kinesis don't regret it. Right guys? The average Kinesis main is 6'5". When people see a Kinesis in a party, they say, "Oh my god, we're gonna clear and it'll be a one and done and it'll be so easy, thank you for being here." There has never been a Kinesis main that has died out in even a single boss. If you go by the lore, Kinesis is stronger than any other class. I don't actually know that, who fucking cares about the lore? If someone pretends to know a lot about Kinesis and tries to place them in a tier list despite knowing nothing, you should believe 100% of what they say, because they know what they're talking about. Kinesis mains are so starved for attention from Nexon that the Kinesis Discord has done giveaways just for being mentioned in a showcase. That's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed the fun fact segment, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to comment, look in the guide below, or join the Kinesis Discord. I'm also going to link a couple channels below that put up some pretty good Kinesis content if you want to learn more. Thanks for watching, see you later.